Hi guys, this is Andrew with Headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to talk about the Sennheiser PXC 552. This is an over-ear closed-back wireless noise-canceling headphone from Sennheiser. Let's check it out. For anyone wondering, this headphone normally comes in right at around $350, but right now it's on a massive sale, coming in at just $200. So this is a headphone that a lot of people are looking at, for the holidays. It's going to make a good gift for somebody, and so we're going to go over that and see how it performs. So to begin with, let's talk about the build, design, and comfort first. The build here is nothing all that special. It's a lot of plastic, but I don't have any problems with plastic for Sennheiser. They're actually quite good at having their headphones be quite long lasting, and I would expect the same from this one. Now it does also have some padding on the top, but unfortunately the ear cups here are not particularly comfortable for me. I find them to be just a little bit on the small side. Now the arms do extend like this, so I find that, for my head, I actually got to extend them pretty far. And the clamp force is also a little bit on the tight side for me, compared to the Bose 700 or the Sony XM4. Those ones were more comfortable to me than this one. Thankfully, you do get full cup swivel this way. That actually turns the headphones off. And then when you click it back this way, they turn on. When I put it on, here's what it looks like. Okay. I find that, while the seal is good on my head, it does clamp down on my earlobe. So my earlobe is actually sticking down below the bottom part of the pad here. So even though these are not round for the ear cup, normally you don't want a round ear cup because ears aren't round. I still find them to be just a little bit on the small side for my ears. I got kind of larger ears as well, so that's probably why I have such amazing hearing. No, I'm just kidding. The other thing to note is that there are a number of different features on this headphone, including noise canceling, but just like many of its competitors, the PXC 552 has touch controls on the side of the cup. So if you want to pause the music, you can tap, and if you want to raise the volume, you can go up. And it tells you that, let me just,
volume max.
Right? It'll let you know. The noise canceling function here, you can switch this button here to be pass through or, fully noise canceling. And there is a difference in terms of the sound quality when you do that. And again, we'll talk about that shortly. But I just want to note a few things about the features here. There are more features than what I've just talked about, but those are the ones that are important to me. The one downside with the features I find is that compared to the Sony XM4, the integration of these features just doesn't feel quite as mature on the PXC 552. So as an example, everything kind of feels like there's a little bit of a delay to it. It's not as seamless. It's not as instant with everything. And I'll even just give you an example. When you turn the headphone off, which that turns it off,
Power off.
right? There's a delay. When you turn it back on,
Phone 2 connected.
it gives me a whole bunch of other stuff going on here, and it's not instant and it's not seamless. So God, it's just constantly doing this. I don't know if it's just this unit. I did update the firmware on this to try and see if it helped, and it didn't. It feels like it's interrupting me. It's probably on purpose. When you connect it to multiple devices, which is great that you can do that. So for example, I can have this connected to my computer, and I can have it connected to my phone at the same time. But there are some weirdnesses with that as well. Like, for example, if you have this hooked up to your computer and you have it hooked up to your phone, randomly, I'll be listening on my phone and it'll start playing something on my computer through a different sound output on my computer. So there are some really weird quirks going on with the feature implementation of this. Lastly, with the features, we got to talk about the noise canceling quality. And it's decent, but it's not as good as the noise canceling from the Sony on the XM4. Specifically, it attenuates the bass frequencies about as well, or very close to the same level, but it doesn't attenuate the higher frequencies as well. So when you're outside walking around, you do still hear the the sounds of traffic. You know, you hear that as upper frequencies coming through, whereas on the Sony, I was, you know, really impressed with the noise canceling quality there. So yes, it has okay noise canceling, but it's just not as good as the XM4. Now let's talk about sound quality with the PXC 552. For technical performance, there are a number of good things here, and it's actually in some ways kind of the opposite of the XM4. So specifically for detail retrieval and image clarity and speed and control and that kind of stuff, the PXC 552 is actually pretty good and better than that of the Sony XM4. It reminds me a little bit of like some of Sennheiser's, you know, other headphones. I'm not going to say it's on the level of like, you know, it's nowhere near the level of like a 650 or anything like that. But for wireless noise canceling headphones, let me just put that away. But for wireless noise canceling headphones, the detail here is actually pretty good in the mids. It's actually quite grainy there in the treble, and we'll get to why. But for the mids, the detail here is definitely better than that of the XM4. Unfortunately, it doesn't have much going on for slam, where the XM4 did do better, in part because it has a much more elevated bass, but I also just found that the driver there had a more punchy kind of quality to it, and this one just doesn't really have that. And then the soundstage on this also isn't particularly good, where it was definitely better on the XM4. So, you know, in many ways, the things that matter to me are definitely better on this than on the XM4. I can certainly see why people would prefer the XM4's technical qualities, like a little bit of a better stage, which in some ways is kind of faked because of the frequency response, but it still perceptively gives that quality. And then it does feel more punchy on the XM4 as well. Still, I think for the market that this is going for, the audience that Sennheiser knows is going to buy this, I think it does do well at the things that they care about. Now, let's dive into the frequency response and tonal balance of this headphone. And once again, if this is something totally new to you, I'll have left a link in the description where you can read all about how to read this stuff and how to make sense of measurements and frequency response. And there's also a video that I've done on this as well if you just want a basic overview. But in short, the dotted line here is the target and the blue line is the frequency response of the headphone. And ideally, we want them to match or be reasonably close. They don't have to match perfectly. Now, with the PXC 552, it's actually pretty darn good for its tonal balance across the board. This is actually a fairly neutral sounding headphone. And starting with the bass, you can see it's really well extended here, you know, down to the limits of human hearing. And then, interestingly, there isn't actually a strong bass shelf here, but it is still elevated there to kind of match the target. So what that means is that you still get really good body and richness of tone there for the lower mids coming through. The rest of the mids are a little bit subdued, but they're not withdrawn like they are on the XM4. This is actually really good for the mids. You know, that was my biggest complaint with the XM4 is that it was just so withdrawn there in the mids. So that means that, you know, none of the fundamental tones would come through for, you know, instruments or vocals or anything like that. And with the PXC 552, it's definitely there. Which is great. And the other cool thing about this is that it has an appropriate elevation where our ear amplifies certain frequencies to match what the brain expects to hear, up until you get to some of the weirdness going on there in the lower treble, you know, around 5K. And this has the effect of making the whole thing sound a little bit aggressive in that region, a little bit gritty, a little bit intense. And, you know, for anybody who's particularly treble sensitive, this may be a bit of a problem for you. But thankfully, everything above that is actually still balanced for the relationship between fundamental and resonant harmonics. So it's, for all the tones that come across, it's totally balanced. It's just a little bit intense, a little bit hot there at around 5K. So if you're thinking about, you know, maybe getting into some EQ with this, definitely just drop 5K by a little bit and it starts to sound quite a bit better. I wouldn't worry too much about that 3.5K peak that's there. Remember that perceptively, while peaks like the ones that show up here in the frequency response are noticeable, if there is an appropriate balance there for where the different elevations are, it's still not really all that bad. And for the PXE 552, I do find it to be noticeable, but once again, not on all recordings, and it is something that I think many people probably won't be bothered by. Now, I just want to note that this frequency response I'm showing you guys here is what you get when the noise canceling is turned on. And I actually recommend keeping the noise canceling on if you want the best sound quality out of this. Not just because you're drowning out everything else, but when you turn on the no noise canceling mode, or letting in all the noise mode, which is this button on the back here, you also get this really weird kind of upper bass bloom that bleeds into the mids. It's a bump right at around like 200 hertz, and it makes it quite odd sounding. The rest of the frequency response didn't really change all that much, and maybe if you want a little bit more extra upper bass energy there for some reason, then that would be fine, but my recommendation would be to use this with the noise cancelling on for the best sound quality. So overall for sound quality, we have a decently well-performing headphone, especially considering that it's a wireless noise cancelling one, that only really suffers from, you know, a fairly narrow closed-in kind of soundstage, not really all that unexpected from a closed back like this that's got small cups as well. And it also suffers from a little bit of a spicy lower treble response there that can be a little bit fatiguing over time, especially for certain recordings with vocals where you're starting to get a little bit of the consonant sounds in there. For instrumental music, it's not really that bad, but I do hear a little bit of the percussion compression stuff getting in there occasionally as well. But overall, the tonal balance is actually pretty darn good for this one. Much better than that of the Sony XM4. So good job there. Anyways, let me do some comparisons here compared to the Bose 700, which is also a wireless noise cancelling headphone. The Bose 700's treble is smoother. It's actually quite smooth on this, and I quite like it. And there's also more bass going on here. Additionally, I also find that the build and design is more appealing and more attractive on the Bose 700. So if that's a thing you care about, I do think this one looks cooler. But then also, I did find the Bose 700 to be considerably more comfortable. This one is very comfy for me, especially for like walking around outside. The clamp foot is not as intense on this one, and the pads also feel nicer. So for all the things that I would use a noise cancelling headphone for, I actually think I prefer the Bose 700. But I'll be doing a review of this one soon, so stay tuned for that. Compared to the Sony WH-1000XM4, which is one that I reviewed not long ago, and you guys can check out that video if you guys want. The PXC 550 Mark II is a much more balanced and neutral sounding headphone. It actually has mids, which is really nice. It's about as aggressive in the treble, maybe a little more aggressive on the 552, but it doesn't have the ridiculousness in the bass that the Sony XM4 has. You know, that thing, it's just a bass bloat into the mids that just drowns out everything else. It sounds super muffled and weird. But the nice thing about the XM4 is that it has a much more mature feature set and mature implementation of the feature set. Even though they have many of the same features, it's just way more seamless on the XM4. And then it also has a really easy way to customize the sound. And actually have a sound profile for that headphone using just the built-in app that kind of makes it less ridiculous and, you know, brings up the mids and tames the bass. But the nice thing about the PXC 552 is that you don't have to do any of that. It already sounds, you know, pretty darn good out of the box, just with a little bit of treble spice there. So if you're particularly sensitive to treble, this might not be the headphone for you. I would recommend either of the other two, and then just, you know, use the EQ preset there. And the noise canceling is actually better on the Sony as well. So on a personal note, I would actually take the Sony XM4 over this one, even though the sound quality is better here, just because I think if you're going to be buying a noise canceling headphone, that is like the most important thing. And the Sony really does nail it. It's just fantastic. And with this one, while it's good, I think that because you can change the EQ settings so easily with the Sony, and the feature set is a little bit more mature there, I would actually personally take that one over this. And lastly, compared to the Odyssey Mobius, which is not a noise cancelling headphone, but it is a wireless feature-rich headphone, and it's also a planar magnetic headphone, whereas the PXC 552 is a dynamic driver in here. Mobius is definitely better as far as all of the technical qualities. So instrument separation, image clarity and distinction, you know, overall tonal definition there. It's way better on the Mobius still, even though it's surprisingly decent on the PXC 552. The other nice thing about the Mobius is that it also has a fairly decent frequency response. They both do. The Mobius is maybe a little bit smoother there in the treble, a little bit warmer there, and it depends because you can use a whole bunch of different presets as well for this. This also has like a weird head tracking thing and a 3D functionality, which I'm not personally all that into, but I could see if somebody is. But in general, if it's just sound quality that you're interested in and you don't care about noise canceling and you still want it to be wireless, then yeah, the Odyssey Mobius is clearly the better headphone. But keep in mind, I think this is meant more to be wired with USB, even though it is wireless capable as well. Just because I think this is meant to be like a gaming headphone. And if you're to use it wirelessly, you might get some delay there. And Odyssey also has the Penrose coming out soon, which is supposed to be low latency wireless. So that might be something to look out for if you're interested in like multimedia use. over this one here. Okay, so is the Sennheiser PXC 550 Mark II worth it? While I still prefer the Sony for the noise canceling and the feature set, which is what I would see myself using a noise canceling headphone for, if you're somebody who listens to music genres that really do benefit from a more neutral presentation, I was thinking, especially classical music, this would actually do really well for that. And also, jazz music, music with instruments, this is going to be totally fine for that. And it's going to sound better than the XM4 does. Now, when you do start doing the EQ with the XM4, I do still think that it's close enough as far as the technical performance goes that it wins out for me. But this is also not as expensive. And so if you're looking for a less expensive option that does actually have good sound quality, then yeah, I do recommend the PXC 550 Mark II. Anyways, that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.